Hey, Alan, you could give us your spiel now.
Okay. So, hello everyone. My name is Alan Kaufman, and I live in Oakland, California, with my dog Sloan, who's over here sleeping on the floor. If you can see her, I don't know if you can see her or not, but it's my dog. She's a husky, and what I do is I'm an author, and I also teach, and I also am an artist. I also paint, and I began the first book I published was called Jew Boy, and it was a memoir. It is a memoir about my youth in the Bronx, New York, where I grew up, and kind of covers the full span of my life, from the schoolyard to the Israeli army to the streets of San Francisco, and writing, and and it covers some of my escapades in the romantic world, and also it touches lightly upon the fact that I used to drink very heavily, and had to get sober. So I was on book tour for Jew Boy, and I was at a panel. There was a panel discussion. I think it was at Endicott Books or Bookstore. Anyway, there was a panel discussion. I was on this panel discussion, and these two ladies approached me after the panel and said, we really would love to read about your drinking. We'd love to read a book about your drinking. And I was like, why would you want to read that? I mean, it's an awful story. And they said, no, we think it would be great. Your perspective is very, regenerative. It's very, optimistic and forward-looking, and looking towards health rather than celebrating disease, which so many authors seem to do. So we'd love to see that. So I didn't immediately, and it turned out one of the ladies was a publisher. So I didn't respond immediately to the suggestion, but over time, other people stepped forward also and said, oh, you should write about your drinking. And I'm in recovery. I'm in a 12-step program. I've got 32 years clean and sober. And I have a sponsor in that program. And he said to me one day, you should write a book about your drinking. So when so many people come at you from so many different directions with the same suggestion, you're getting a message from the universe, So anyway, I sat down to begin to write the story of my drinking, of my alcoholism. And just to say that alcoholism, you're never cured of alcoholism. All you get is a daily reprieve from drinking, one day at a time. So that means for 32 years, I've had a reprieve from drinking one day at a time, but I have to do certain things to maintain that situation, to sustain my recovery. So so I sat down and I began to write Drunken Angel, and I have to say it was a staggering. Initially, it was a staggering job. I mean, I didn't want to look at all of this stuff. I didn't want to remember some of the things I would need to remember to write the book. I was ashamed and tired of it, and it wasn't a happy experience initially to write the book. But what I did was I began to read little parts of it to people, close friends, and they were, oh, that's they weren't sad at all, and they weren't depressed from it, and it's like, oh, that's great, it was so interesting. So I felt encouraged to go on. I felt that the book could be of service, if I write it. So encouraged, I kept going. And the important thing of writing books, as opposed to writing short stories or poems or articles, is the ability to sustain your narrative. It's it's a difficult job, and one of the things that is important to it is the development of character. So I had this job in Drunken Angel of developing the character of an alcoholic into a recovering alcoholic. I had to affect this transition. And so the book is kind of divided into two parts thematically, is the drinking, in which I had to be brutally honest. And then what happened, and then what is it like now? So that's, usually when you're writing a book, a memoir in particular, the three parts that you cover: what happened, what was it like, what happened, and what is it like now? And it just turns out that in recovery, in 12-step programs, when you're telling your story, that is also the suggested structure of your share. What was it like, what happened, what is it like now? So that became my structure for the book. And it was, I was amazed when I finished it. I thought I had been very honest, like brutally honest. And, but I felt that there was hope in the book, particularly around the subject of my daughter, where there had been a lot of, conflict. And, the book ends on a happy note with my kid and I and her friend in a car. So that was an important thing too. And, my daughter was very excited to hear that she was going to be a character in one of my books, And so that's it. And, I've gone on book tour with this book, and it was very well received. It was very handsomely received. Everywhere I gave readings, people were appreciative. I had people showing up at the readings for this who, brought their parents, like people who were alcoholics, who brought, recovering alcoholics who brought their parents, parents who were recovering alcoholics who brought their children. It was a real family affair, because alcoholism is a family disease, by the way. That's something that's commonly said in meetings, is that this is a family disease. And it really, in many respects, it is. So I had a lot of family people showing up, and yeah. So that's I don't know if you want to hear more, but I would love to hear your questions or thoughts, or tell me about your experiences.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, was your father an alcoholic? I didn't think.
No. My father and mother did not drink at all. But my Uncle Arnold, my father's brother, was a raging alcoholic. My Uncle Al was a raging alcoholic. And all of my cousins from the Bronx, every one of them were drug addicts who two of them died in prison. One was in for murder and the other one was in for attempted murder. They both died from HIV, from needle use, and AIDS. And then a third brother, Ivy, died in his mother's bathtub from an overdose. So there was, I was burying cousins. When I was a kid, I remember, Ivy went to Ivy's funeral, and my family was so messed up, they couldn't even properly, when they were lowering his coffin into the grave, they couldn't even properly hold onto it, because two of the brothers, Harvey and Larry, were serious drug addicts, and they just let go of his coffin, and his coffin fell into the grave. And his body spilled out and was covered with dirt. And I jumped into the grave, and I remember scooping the dirt out of his eyes and his mouth and rolled him into the coffin, and then yelled, "Bury him." So, that was my family. Yeah.
The you know, in my reading, I always fascinated about, and then I'm going to open it up to you guys. So have some good questions prepared for Alan. You had various characters in your life that would come in, and as you made your slow progression from, being an alcoholic to regaining your sobriety and becoming a success in the literary world. And one of the characters that was very interesting, there were many interesting characters, was of course the goldfish. You had an intense, loving relationship with the goldfish.
That's right.
Now, I can understand a cat and dog, but a goldfish, what do you think?
Well, my first sponsor, recovery sponsor, I was moaning and groaning about, I want to have a girlfriend, all this. And he said, I don't think you're ready at this stage. I don't think you're ready for a human relationship. He said, why don't you try a goldfish? So, I always did what my sponsor suggested. And I went to pet store and I bought a goldfish and I brought the goldfish home. And, there's the goldfish is on the cover of the hardcover edition. It's a goldfish. That goldfish became quite a popular character from the book. Anyway, I had to learn how to take care of a goldfish. Part of being an alcoholic or an addict is you don't really care about the life of others. You don't really care about caring for others. You don't care about things outside of your own self-centered, obsession with drugs and alcohol. You don't care. And so I had this new found birth of caring for a fish, a little goldfish. And what happened was, I really became quite attached. All I can say is I became quite attached to this goldfish. I named the goldfish Deborah, which is my brother's wife's name. To this day, my brother and I are still trying to figure out what was going on in my crazy head that made me name a goldfish after his wife. Because I'm not attracted to her. It's not like I wanted to love her. But it was like the first name that popped into my head. And I said, I'll call you Deborah. So I named the goldfish Deborah. What's that?
At least she didn't name him like a filter fish, Deborah.
No, but I named her Deborah. And when I would come home each day from wherever I'd been that day, I used to go to the fish tank, fish bowl really, and she would come to the glass, and it was like she was saying hello to me. It's probably hallucinating in my crazy brain, but it seemed to me that the fish was greeting me and was happy to see me. And I became absolutely attached to this fish. I loved this fish. And one of the most moving parts in the book, in fact, when I gave readings for the book in public, people would cry at the death of Deborah. They would cry, as I did.
Well, you were caring for someone, right? Something.
Yeah, and when I would read that, people would cry. When they read that, I'd read how happy I was at Deborah and all the good stuff, and then the day that I came home and found her dead. Not that, just natural life of a goldfish is not long, not terribly long. And I found her dead. It was one of the most devastating experiences I've had. I mean, it's strange as I say, I was a soldier. I was in combat. The most devastating experience I ever had was the death of my goldfish, because it was the first thing I really.
You're fully evolved now, right? From what you were,
Oh, yeah.
right? And so I mean,
like
just as interesting.
So.
You like to think so.
Now I can care for a dog.
Now you can care for a dog, but and that's not easy. I know for a cat, not easy either.
Yeah.
But I was going to say, just talking with you now before the show, you said you were going to join this volunteer program to help elderly ladies walk back from the subway to their homes in Oakland,
Yeah,
California, where you live, because you got a
yeah,
big dog and you're a
yeah,
big guy, and
yeah.
not,
Well,
no,
there's been a spate of attacks on senior ladies and also younger ladies, and coming in Berkeley, coming from the BART station to their home. And so they're trying to start up a program now in Berkeley where people will meet the lady at the BART station and walk her home. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to go volunteer for that because I'm a combat veteran, a big guy. I have this big dog, and I'm pretty sure if we're walking along with some lady, nobody's going to bother her. So yeah, I'm going to do that.
okay. So let's hear from the students. Remember, good questions. This is your chance.
Sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah.
In your book,
Okay.
there's many different time frames on where you are sober and then you relapse. What was your main motivation to stop? Was it for yourself or for your kid, or because people said so?
Well, I never relapsed in recovery. In other words, I didn't. Whatever efforts I made to stop drinking were not serious. I mean, I wasn't in any kind of program then. I would just decide I'm going to not drink, and then of course I would drink. And so what it was I was living in Tompkins Square Park, and I described this in Drunken Angel. I was living in the park. I was living in the streets, and there was a guy in the park, Tompkins Square Park in East Village. There was this guy there who was a really hardcore junkie. And he said to me one night, he said, we were sitting on the park bench, rats are running under our feet, we're sharing a bottle of Gallo Port. And he said, you don't really belong here. You're not a street guy. He said, you're not a junkie drunk. You don't belong here. I said, yeah, well, here I am, though. I got here. He said, yeah, but I think you should get out of here. You should get out of this. And I said, well, what do I do? And that was the first time anyone mentioned, a recovery program, a 12-step program to me. I won't say the letters, but because we don't talk about it in public, but you probably guess which program I'm talking about. It's very popular. He mentioned that to me, and he said, their meetings are free. Just walk in, see what happens. So I did that, and I stayed. I went into the first meeting with my friend's wife. She was in recovery. She took me into a meeting. I sat there. I saw people raising their hands saying, I'm an alcoholic, I'm an addict. It's like, wow, these are my people. And I stayed, That's what I did. I just sat in that meeting and stayed. And then I went to the next meeting. That was the key. It was just going to a meeting and then staying, say, okay, I'm going to do this. I can do this. So yeah, that's what made the difference.
Good question. Anyone else? Chris, I can't hear you, Christina. Unmute yourself, Christina. Christina, unmute yourself.
I don't think her microphone is working.
I can hear.
Talking? You can hear her? Okay, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Hi, Christina. So I can't hear this lady. She's speaking, but I can't hear you.
Yeah, I understand why. Something with your connection?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
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 Okay, I had to change my microphone. But my question was, throughout the book, we can see little changes or little shifts, and then it kind of regresses. But I think we all see a major shift towards the positive when you have a daughter. So I just want to know how you think having a daughter changed you as a person.
Okay, good question. So when I had the daughter, Isadora, I was ecstatic. But I was married to a lady that I did not get along with. I mean, we knew each other a week. And I didn't know her at all, this woman who I was married to. I just woke up married, That's what you do when you drink. Like wake up married to a stranger. And so that's what happened. But she got pregnant quickly. And I was like, I'm gonna stay with this. I'm not gonna run away. I'm not gonna abandon. I'm gonna stay with it, And when the baby was born, it was one of the most transformative experiences I ever had in my life. I mean, it was an incredibly ecstatic moment. I couldn't believe it when they put this baby in my arms and said, Mr. Kaufman, this is your daughter. I just, I went to pieces. I couldn't believe it. So I did everything I could to, be the father that I thought, being a good father means. I supported them. I took care of the baby. I loved hanging out with Isadora. That was one of my favorite things, was waking up at 3 a.m. when she would wake up and dancing with her. She liked to dance. She liked when I would dance with her in the living room. So I put on a little music softly and we'd be dancing in the living room together. I just taking her around Manhattan, to my friends in the East Village or some of the clubs I used to hang out in. And, I loved it. Everybody loved her. She was a real character, everybody loved Isadora. And I take it to the museum, I take it to the Museum of Modern Art and hold her up to paintings. And she'd like put a hand out to touch the paintings. And then the guard would come running over and say, no touching the paintings. But my daughter wanted to touch the painting, and she's now a very artistic person, so anyway, so I loved all of that. But the thing is that the fighting with my wife was horrible. And there was one time that somebody called the police, and the police came and they saw right away, they said, to my wife, they said, lady, your husband doesn't look like he's fighting with you. You're the one who's yelling here, not him, which was true. I mean, I didn't want to fight. And so they said, somebody's got to leave here. And I said, I'll leave. I don't want to have to, she's with the baby, so I said, I'll leave. So I left and I was in the back of the police car. They were driving me to a subway station. And one of them, the cops said to me, and I wrote about this in the book, he said, hey, pal, it's none of my business, but that lady of yours? I said, yeah. They said, drop her. And he was right. I mean, there was never going to be happiness between us ever. And it was really not conducive to the baby to hear all that fighting, to be in the house with all that fighting. It's not a good thing. So that's what I did. I left. I parted ways. But the thing is, that was easier said than done because I missed Isadora like crazy. And I missed her a lot. And then I got sober and I came to San Francisco, and every year I'd be like, when am I going to see my daughter? When am I going to, and she wouldn't write to me. She wouldn't, my ex-wife wouldn't talk to me or communicate. It was driving me nuts. It was literally driving me nuts. And I think it was like when Isadora was 6, I think she just kept saying, where's dad? Where's my daddy? She wanted to see me. That my ex-wife gave up. She gave it. She said, all right. So she wrote to me and said, Isadora wants to see you. Boom. I was on an airplane. They were in Israel at that time. I flew right to Israel. Ran around I had no money. I was running around borrowing money to get an airplane ticket. And I went to see her, and it was a happy, very happy reunion. It was like we'd never been apart. It really was. It was amazing. Like once you make that initial connection with a baby, with a kid, a little kid, toddler, that connection remains. It really remains. And I saw that, how true that was. I mean, we hadn't seen each other for, 4 years, but it was like we'd never been apart. we were hanging out together, laughing, having a great time. And so, yeah. I don't know if that answers your question, but
Good question.
good
Good
question.
answer.
Thank you.
Yeah. You know, we always say in memoir, there's a lot of things also you could have written about in the memoir, right? But you have to pick and choose, right? How do you go about that? And particularly, I found, well, many students didn't agree with me, which is fine. I found that the bus was a really important transitional, I mean,
Yeah, no, the bus was
transitional
that bus, that
piece of
3-day journey on the bus kind of changed my life in a way.
And
But when I write a memoir, I've written 2 memoirs and 2 novels, which are my novels are very memoiristic. They're usually everything I write is based on my personal experience. Even the fiction is based on my personal experience in some way. I'm referencing that. So when I write a book, the first thing I ask myself is, okay, well, what is this book about? Can I summarize what this book is about in 1 or 2 sentences? Like, that's very important to me. I have to be able to say in 1 or 2 sentences, well, what is this book about? And the reason I learned that is when I was sitting down with publishers, they always ask the same thing. The first question they ask you is, well, what is the book about? And they don't want to hear a long, involved, convoluted answer. They're busy people, and they want to know, like, immediately what this book is about. And so I had to come up with a 1 or 2 sentence synopsis, summary of what the book is about. So that's what I do. When I start a book, I say, okay, I ask myself, what is this book about? And I get it down and reduce it down to 1 or 2 or 3 sentences at the most. And then I say, okay, well, what incidents relate to this? And I begin to make a list, free-form list of any incidents I can think of from my life that relate to this summary, this synopsis, this 2 or 3 sentence summary. That's my mission statement. So what relates to them? What episodes? I don't ask why are you putting that down, or does it really relate or not. If it occurs to me, I write it down. I make a list, a long list. And then when I start to write the book, I look at the list and say, okay, well, what's speaking to me from this list right now? What's speaking to me? And whatever pops out at me, I'll start to write about that. And I have a rule that if I start to write about something, I have to finish it. That's how they become chapters. That's how every episode that I pick from that list becomes a chapter. Later on, I'll figure out how to create transitions, bridges, as they're called, between one chapter and another. That's easily done. But until then, it's just writing about each thing on that list completely in one narrative, one chapter. And that's got to become it's got to be told, the story has to be told completely. So if I write about an episode or an incident, I have to tell about that completely. And so that's how I do it, and it works so far. It's been working for me. It's been 4 books. It's worked. So.
Some more questions.
What was the hardest part to write about in Drunken Angel?
It was about Rose. Rose, the woman who I'm in love with and whose life I'm completely destroying. Who loves me, she follows me everywhere that I'm wandering, and she's with me. She leaves her husband for me. She leaves her life for me. She goes, where it was Rose. That was heartbreaking for me to write about. And
she has a different name in the novel, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And the memoir, rather.
Her name was
Name was
Rose.
Roy.
And yeah, that was writing about that woman that I loved so much. I was destroying her with my drinking. That was really hard. It's, we say, it's hard to say I love someone, I mean, like romantically, but I loved her. I really loved her. And she loved me. And that should have been she was like a perfect mate for me. She was an artist. I was a writer. She was into the same kind of cultural stuff I was into. We got along very, very well, except when I was drinking, and then I would turn into a crazy animal, unpredictable jerk, who would lock myself. Even when we lived together, I would lock myself in a room, and she would like want to see me. I would say, yell at her through the door, get away, leave me alone. And I was just a jerk, a drunken jerk. And so that was hard. And yeah. Anyway, yeah, I went up to Canada. She brought me up to meet her parents, and she thought maybe if we lived in Canada, it would be better. Like that's a common fallacy is that doing a geographic is going to fix the problem. It never does, especially among drinkers. If I go here, if I travel there, if I set up a new life in this place, it's going to solve the problem of my drinking, and it never, ever does. And so that's what we did. Rose and I did a lot of geographics, from Israel to New York, from New York to Canada, Toronto. And then finally in Toronto, I left her. And that was heartbreaking. It was just really, I don't even know how I did that. I was so cold-hearted. I was really like this selfish jerk. And that's what drinking, helps you to be. I can't blame it all on drinking. I think part of me was a selfish jerk, but there was definitely no question that drinking brought that out and really brought that out of me. What a selfish jerk I was.
And I think, so to some extent, this is just my opinion, the myth of the boozing alcoholic, tragic boozing alcoholic, it's fed to a lot of us, and, from Hemingway to Fitzgerald and all that stuff.
When I was growing up,
you were feeding into that. Yeah.
You're absolutely right. When I was growing up, my heroes were William Faulkner, Ernest Hemingway, especially Jack Kerouac. I mean, these guys were famous for their drinking. They were notorious drunks. Charles Bukowski, notorious drunks. Now, what's interesting, like I've mentioned Bukowski, is that in actual fact, Bukowski was not a raging alcoholic. He did drink kind of like moderately every day, but he wasn't a raging drunk. I was a much worse drunk than Charles Bukowski. Bukowski never really hit the skids. He just wrote about his life as though he did hit the skids, but he in fact did not. He worked in the post office for 10 years straight and got a pension from the post office. He was a good worker. And so,
well, as someone pointed out to me that, if he was as drunk as he said he was, it was almost a marketing thing. If he was as drunk as he said he was, he wouldn't have been able to do all that writing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can't do both. You can't be a writer and a drinker. So Hemingway, he had a schedule, he had a way of keeping it under control, but it didn't work. He declined. He became a drinker, a bad drinker who couldn't write anymore, and then he died. And Faulkner did, of course, manage to write like 17 or 18 or 19 novels before he died of stomach ulcer. His stomach bled out. That's how he died. So you guess he wore out the lining of his stomach from his drinking. But they managed to write. They managed to produce books. I did not manage to produce books until I got sober. For me, my drinking was really, I was a bad drunk and a gutter drunk. And gutter drunks don't write books. And you know,
Okay,
it's
some more
funny, when I
questions.
got sober, my sponsor, my recovery sponsor, said, "What do you want to do with the gift of sobriety? You're sober now. What do you want to do?" I said very hesitantly, I said, I always dreamed of being a writer. He said to me immediately, "That is what you must do. You must do that no matter what. You have to join the no matter what club." And I did. I joined the no matter what club, which was no matter what, I'm going to stay sober and I'm going to write. Those became the 2 feet with which I walked through life from then on, and still walk. I'm going to stay sober and I'm going to write, no matter what.
Ironically, though, the fact that you drank and did all these things made for a great memoir.
Well, true enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, what else?
I was wondering, was it difficult for you to portray yourself so truthfully and to be so vulnerable in your writing?
In recovery, in recovery programs, right, where you stand up in front of strangers and you tell your truth, you tell your story. After doing that a lot, I mean, I didn't start writing my memoir until I was like 10 years sober. It was, I was able to do it. I was able to, tell the truth. Go no, right? I mean, yeah, because I had so much practice at it. It had become normal for me. I think for most people, it's not a normal thing to stand up in front of, 100 strangers and tell some of the worst things that you ever did and laugh about it. It's not normal. So
It's
I don't know.
what we talk about in class is that I want you to bleed a little, and your
Yeah,
book is
yeah,
bloody, that's for sure. But I know it's hard. It's I don't expect them to um, you know you know to bleed as much as you did. But it's always good to be honest and about yourself, and that we're all flawed people, and that gives complexity to the character. You'd agree on that? Yeah.
yeah. No, absolutely agree with you. But it's also important to be honest about your good points.
Yeah.
People have a hard time with that too. Um, so it's both. It's your dark side and your light side. The dark and the light. That's what good writing should do, is illustrate both the darkness and the light.
Okay. What else? Someone volunteer? Ask a question? Always
You can
good.
ask me anything.
Always good to ask a question. Good for class participation. Right, Tori? Do you have a question?
I do actually. If there was like one or a few pieces of advice specifically that you could give to other people that are in recovery, what would that be?
The first thing is to get help, right? That was the hardest thing, is to admit that you have a problem. Most people have a problem with any problem with admitting they have a problem. So that was the hardest thing, was to admit that I have a problem, what happened, the way I got into recovery was that I was living in Tompkins Square Park. I was in the streets. I had no money, no food. I was filthy, covered in rags. And I called up this friend of mine from graduate. I went to graduate school at Columbia University. I called up a friend of mine from Columbia, Danny. Say, "Hey, Danny, how you doing?" The usual, junkie rap. "Hey, man, I'm in trouble. I'm in the streets." It's like, "Oh, wow, really?" He said, "Hold on a second. Let me give you my wife." He put his wife on. She turned out she was in recovery. And she said, "Well, what are you doing right now?" I said, "Well, I'm in the park. I got no money." She said, "You know what? Get a cab and come down to us, to our house. She gave me the address. I got to tell you, it took me a long while before I could get a taxi to stop for me, because I looked, But finally, one was desperate enough to do that. And I had to go to Brooklyn. It took me all the way to Brooklyn. And they were waiting for me on the steps of their house. They had a beautiful brownstone. He was writing for Spielberg. He was writing a screenplay for Steven Spielberg, the Flintstones movie. He was working on that. And so they had good money, and they took me into the house, and she said, Danny, can I talk to Alan for a second? And so I went into the kitchen with her, and I figured I had it made in the shade. His wife wants to talk to me alone. Great. Get out of here, Danny. We don't need you. I'm going to hustle this lady for whatever I can get. So, but she knew exactly where I was, what was going on with me, exactly. And she said,
How would you hustle her? How would you hustle her if
oh, tell us, a sad story, bring in all the elements, I could to make her feel sorry for me. And then, I need a place to stay, and I don't have any money in my pocket. I need to get up on my feet, and I have to get on my feet, all the usual BS. As soon as I have money in my pocket, go to the liquor store and say, blow them off. So anyway, she said, well, she said, Alan, I'm going to go to a meeting. She says, I'm in recovery, and I need help for my drinking. So I go to these meetings. Would you go with me? So I'm a nice guy. I'm not going to say no to, my friend's wife. She needs help. Sure, I'll go with her I'll take her to a meeting. And I went to that meeting with her, and halfway through that meeting, a light went on. It was like a miracle. The light went on that I was killing myself drinking, that I needed help, that these people could help me. And so that was where it started. It started there. Everybody in the meeting passed their phone number to me, saying to me after the meeting, call me for anything, call me anytime. I was a drunk living in a park in Times Square. People didn't give you their phone number. People didn't say, call me. But they were like, call me. And I said to my friend's wife afterwards, I said, are there any more of these meetings? She said, yeah, there's another one starting in 30 minutes. You want to go? And I went to that meeting with her too. And that's how it began.
I was going to say, when I hear you talking, I hear a lot of laughter, and could be nervous laughter, or it could just be like you're looking back on things and the absurdity of it. I mean, maybe you want to address that.
Well, it says in the main book of AA, it says we absolutely insist upon being happy, joyous, and free. We absolutely insist on that, on being happy, joyous, and free, which is
so your laughter.
I feel that.
So
way.
You feel happy.
I feel happy, joyous, and free.
Because you realize what you were and what you are now.
Yeah. Right? Are you kidding? To escape death?
Right.
To escape destruction? To be, talking here to a class of remarkable young people, about writing, about your books. That to me is a miracle. I shouldn't be here. If life were fair, I would be dead. So, to me, this is gravy. This is, this is part of the benefits of getting sober. Writing books, talking about your experience to people. That's part of the joy.
Alan, we had discussed previously that when we discussed Jew Boy, they were going to make a movie out of it. You're really a purist as a writer. Some people sell their soul, but they wanted to make some sort of movie out of it. But you just didn't like the treatment. It wasn't true to the book.
No, what they wanted to do it was not my story. It was not the story of the book, and I said no, no, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't care about that. I honestly, all I care about is the next book.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, some more questions.
I have a question. How did the writing process on Drunken Angel and Jew Boy, like, did they differ at all, or were they similar, having to go back through these like traumatic experiences?
Good question. Good question. The process was different in Jew Boy because that was my first. It's like your first kid, and you're learning. You're learning as you go. By Drunken Angel, I knew a lot. I knew about what it meant to write a book, and I knew how to do it. And so there was a very different process. It was very different. It was very different. I felt more confidence with Drunken Angel. And yeah, I did. When you're writing your first book, you have moments when you say, am I crazy? I mean, people are going to read this. People are going to want this. It really is a challenge. And to your esteem, it's like, who am I kidding? Nobody's going to read this crap. And the amazing thing is that you finish it and somebody buys it. A publisher says, we want this book. And then it gets reviewed, it gets good reviews, and that's it. That's like a miracle. That's like, you can't believe it. And I wrote about that in Drunken Angel, how the experience of getting your book published, what that feels like when you're in New York, you're in Manhattan, you see newspapers with your picture on it. It's like, what happened? You can't believe it. I couldn't believe it. I can still remember the joy I felt at that. So it stays with you too. It's an
But
ongoing
even
benefit.
the little successes, like even a chapbook that some old woman bought at a reading, and you remember those as well, right?
That kept me alive. That actually, those little chapbooks kept me alive when they were bought. That's how I ate. I had no money to eat. That was what I had.
You went out for Chinese food.
That's right. I still remember that.
I love
still
Chinese
remember that
food.
meal.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just in Chinatown for Chinese New Year. Had
There you
this
go.
food. So anyone else? Anyone else who hasn't participated?
I have a question.
Yes.
So, I know in the beginning of the book, you talk about the assaults from the men, and then as you grow up, the fights with like everyone and picking fights. Do you think that also played a part in becoming an alcoholic?
Yeah. I think it was a symptom of my alcoholism that I was, combative like that. That wanting to get into it, to scrap. But I got to say also in honesty, the way I grew up in the Bronx, my father and my uncle, when they would get together and talk, what do you think they would talk about? They would talk about the fights they had when they were young. You know what I mean? And I was a little kid, listening to this. And my cousins, were gangsters. Larry and Dennis and Harvey they were gangsters. I mean, they killed people. And so there was that element. And then when I got into the schoolyard, I got thrown into school. You really had to fight for your life. I mean, they went right at, my brother and I were like these two fat little Jewish kids, they went right for us. And I had to, and it was like, I had this realization, if I don't change something, this is just going to keep going on. This is not going to stop. So I began to play a lot of sports. I began working out, started lifting weights, doing all that stuff. And by the time I was 15, I could give it as good as I got it. And by the time I was 16, people were afraid of me. So which was my objective. My objective was I wanted people to fear me. which is a strange objective to have, when you're trying to develop into a human being. It's like, I want people to fear me. What kind of crazy thing is that? But part of it was growing up in an atmosphere of an environment of violence. And violence was a given. You did not get away without that. Where I grew up. And at the time I grew up, violence, it was part of the landscape. So,
And the landscape is very important, and you describe it very well. The landscape of the Bronx, landscape when you were visiting Isaac Singer,
Ivy
landscape,
Singer.
yeah, all these things contribute to the memoir. But if I asked you, just some general advice, these students are writing memoirs, essays, and what general advice would you give them in writing the essays?
You can't write about your whole life in one book, one essay, or whatever. You can't write about your whole life. My suggestion is pick one thing about your life and write about that. Like, decide, what it is, right? Like, decide, like, for instance, I like to play football or whatever. Just pick one thing that's important to your life, important to you as a person. And then, and put that at the top of the page and say, okay, what relates to this? What things that happened in my life in whatever form relate to this? And put that down, make a list, And so, like, I picked the example of football, right? So I like football. Put that at the top of the page and start making a list of what relates to I like football, So I can remember things that happened when I was playing football, that we had a team called the Bronx Huns. So I write the Bronx Huns. There was a game in which I had to play against when I was young. I had to play against a famously brutal Irish guy, with chipped, jagged teeth and mean. And I had to play against him, and I did well. So I put down, playing against blah, blah. I don't want to say his name. And so forth. And also the times I got my butt kicked, I got my ass kicked. Put down, times I got my ass kicked. You put these things down. Oh, with Vince Lombardi, I don't know if you know who he was, but Vince Lombardi was a great coach of the Green Bay Packers, and I was obsessed with the Green Bay Packers. I was obsessed with Vince Lombardi, who was this famous mythic figure. So I wrote down Vince Lombardi. I don't even remember if I wrote about Vince Lombardi, but put it down, put it on, make a list. And when you've got a list of all the things that pertain to your topic, which is just one aspect of your life, right? Not everything. Just look at the list and say, okay, what jumps out at me? What do I want to write about here? Whatever that is, start writing about it. And don't stop writing about it until you have finished a chapter. Doesn't matter how long or short the chapter is, but stay with it to the end. It's very important because you always have something more to say than you think you do. Always. You don't know how much you have to say until you really start to write about it.
And you have to revise, right?
Until you decide not to stop until you have said it. Sorry?
I'm just saying revision is important, right?
Well, revision?
Yeah.
Oh, revision comes after you finished writing the first draft.
Okay.
Of
Okay,
course.
I'm
No,
sorry.
I write
Yeah.
after I finish the first draft, I revise minimum 3 times. Minimum 3 times. 3 revisions. Sometimes more. And I once had one thing I wrote that was only 2 revisions. That's very rare. 3 revisions is a standard where you're getting it. You're doing well. Of course, you don't start cutting out the best parts too. You have to be careful when you revise, not to butcher your work. But anyway.
Any questions? Any more questions for Alan? No. Anyone who hasn't participated like to say something? Well, I want to thank Alan very much for coming here and sharing his wisdom. What was I going to say? I think Alan, if he's done in past classes, if you want to email him about something,
Always.
he's offered his email.
I'll give you my email here.
Okay.
And I'll also text it to you, but it's akpoem number 2, akpoem2 at gmail.com.
And if you guys do the the essay, on Alan, which is for extra credit, I'll show him your essays. Unless they're really bad.
No, I would love to see them.
But I was just joking. But anyway, yeah. So thanks for coming. I know I'm very impressed with everyone here because officially the college is closed, but yet you came to Doug Holder and Alan Kaufman to the class.
Good questions.
So
Good questions.
and very good questions. So thank you very much, everyone. And we'll see you on Thursday. We'll be going over your drafts on Thursday. So thank you.
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 Maggie.